At the graduation party, my parents threw ostensibly for me. My father raised his champagne flute before 60 guests. Yet, his eyes locked onto my younger sister. He announced that she was the only child worth celebrating. Silence fell over the room. At 32, holding a master's degree, I finally realized they had chosen the wrong audience to humiliate me. My husband Mitchell squeezed my hand under the table, but I was already done playing their game. My name is Emery Watson. I am 32 years old, and for the last 2 hours, I have been sitting at a table draped in white linen that feels more like a shroud than a celebration. The air in the grand ballroom of the Oaks Country Club is recycled and cold, smelling faintly of expensive lilies and roast duck. Beside me, my husband, Mitchell Hale, is a statue of silent fury. His hand rests on his thigh, the knuckles white, but his face is a mask of polite disinterest. He is watching them. We are both watching them. The room is filled with 60 people. They are not my friends. They are not my colleagues. They are the curated collection of my parents' social ambition donors, board members, local politicians, and people who own summer homes in places I have never visited. They are here because Gordon and Diane Watson summoned them. The invitation, heavy cream cardstock with gold embossing, had ostensibly been for my graduation. I had just completed a master's degree in emergency management and community resilience. It was a grueling, unglamorous 2-year slog that involved working shifts in disaster zones and writing a thesis on logistical failures during state emergencies. But looking around the room, you would not know that. There are no banners congratulating me. The centerpiece is not a mortarboard or a scroll. The banner stretching across the stage behind the podium reads, in elegant serif font, "The Watson Legacy." That should have been my first warning. The clinking sound cuts through the low hum of conversation. It is sharp, authoritative, metal against crystal. My father, Gordon Watson, is standing up. He looks impeccable. He always does. He is wearing a midnight blue suit that fits him with architectural precision. His hair is silver, the kind of silver that suggests wisdom rather than age. He holds his champagne flute by the stem, his other hand resting casually in his pocket. The room falls silent in a way that feels practiced, as if everyone here knows their cue. "Family," my father begins. His voice is a rich baritone, projected perfectly without the need for the microphone just yet. "Family is the cornerstone of everything we build. It is the why and the how." He smiles. It is a good smile. It is the smile that has raised millions of dollars for the hospital wing that bears his name. He scans the room, making eye contact with the mayor, then the bank president. "Tonight, we gather to celebrate achievement," he says. I straighten my back. My heart does a traitorous little stutter in my chest. Despite everything, despite the cold emails, the lack of interest, the years of being the afterthought, there is a small, stupid part of me that wants him to look at me. I want him to say, "Emery worked hard. Emery did this on her own." Gordon turns. His eyes sweep over the table. They slide over Mitchell. They slide over me. There is no friction, no pause. It is as if I am made of glass. His gaze lands, heavy and adoring, on the person sitting to my left. "Brielle," he says. My younger sister freezes. She is 24, dressed in a shimmering slip dress that catches the light. She looks beautiful and terrified. "When Diane and I look at the future," Gordon continues, his voice swelling with emotion, "we see it in you. We see the grace, the poise, and the potential that this family stands for." I can feel the blood draining from my face. It feels like a physical drop, a sudden loss of pressure. "We have big news coming for Brielle," Gordon announces, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that carries to the back of the room. New ventures, new horizons, and tonight, surrounded by our dearest friends, I realize something. He raises his glass higher. It is rare to have a child who truly embodies the spirit of the Watson name, a child who understands duty and image. He pauses for effect. "To Brielle," he says, "the only child worth celebrating." The sentence hangs in the air like smoke. the only child worth celebrating. It is not a slip of the tongue. It is not a clumsy phrasing. It is a statement of fact. It is a proclamation. My mother, Diane, is sitting across from him. She is wearing pearls that cost more than my entire tuition. She nods. It is a small, firm movement. Her lips are curved into that placid, terrifying smile she wears when she is destroying someone socially. She raises her glass. To Brielle, she echoes softly. For a second, the room is paralyzed. These people are sharks, but they are polite sharks. They know I'm sitting right there. They know the invitation said Emery's graduation. They know I am the one with the new degree. They heard the sentence. They understand the cruelty of it. I look around. I see the hesitation in the eyes of a woman 3 tables away. She holds her glass halfway to her mouth, her gaze darting between me and my father. She looks like she wants to say something, but then she looks at Gordon's face, the power he holds, the connections he controls, and she makes her choice. She drinks, one by one. They all make their choice. To Brielle, a chorus of murmured voices ripples through the room. No one looks at me. It is a fascinating study in social cowardice. If they look at me, they have to acknowledge the insult. If they look at me, they become complicit in the humiliation, so they simply erase me. They focus their eyes on the centerpiece, on their wine, on Brielle, on the chandeliers. I have become a ghost in my own life, under the table. Mitchell's hand clamps down on mine. His grip is hard, grounding. It is the only thing keeping me from floating away or screaming. I can feel the heat of his skin. He is not looking at me. He is staring at my father with a look so cold it could freeze the champagne in the glasses. Breathe, Mitchell whispers. His lips barely move. I try. The air feels too thick. My heart is hammering against my ribs. A frantic, wet thumping sound that seems deafening in the silence following the toast. I feel a burning sensation behind my eyes. The prick of tears I refuse to shed. I will not cry. I will not give them the satisfaction of a breakdown. That is what they want. They want me to cause a scene so they can shake their heads and say, "See? She is unstable. She is jealous." This is why we focus on Brielle. I look at Brielle. She is staring at her plate, her face pale. She knows this is wrong, but she says nothing. She never says anything. She takes the praise like she takes the money with a bowed head and an open hand. I push my chair back. The legs of the chair scrape against the hardwood floor. It is a harsh, grating sound. Nobody turns. They are swarming. They are standing up, moving toward the head of the table to clink glasses with my father, to fawn over Brielle, to touch the hem of the Watson garment. They have surrounded my sister like moths around a very expensive flame. I stand up. My legs feel heavy, like they are filled with lead. I smooth the front of my dress. It is a simple navy sheath, professional, understated. It looks like a uniform compared to the glitter in the room. Mitchell starts to rise with me, but I press my hand briefly on his shoulder. Stay for a second. I signal, watch them. I turn and walk away from the table. It is a long walk to the double doors at the back of the hall. The carpet is plush, swallowing the sound of my heels. I feel like I am walking through water. To my left, I pass a table of my father's business partners. They are laughing about a merger. They do not see me. To my right, a group of women from the Charity League are admiring the floral arrangements. They do not see me. I am the invisible woman. I am the background noise. I reach the heavy mahogany doors. The brass handles are cool under my palms. I pause. I cannot help it. I glance back one last time. The scene is perfect. It looks like a painting in a museum. The golden light. The beautiful people. The happy family in the center. My parents are beaming, their hands resting possessively on Brielle's shoulders. They look complete. They look relieved that the problem me has removed itself from the frame. Just as I push the door open, a voice drifts over from the table nearest the exit. It is a hushed whisper, cutting through the ambient chatter. "It is a shame," a man's voice says. "The older one looks capable. I heard she actually works for a living." Shh, a woman replies. Don't get involved. Gordon has his reasons. I push the door open and step out into the corridor. The silence of the hallway is sudden and absolute. The heavy doors swing shut behind me, severing the noise of the party like a guillotine. The air out here is cooler. The hallway is lined with mirrors and sconces. I walk over to the nearest mirror and stare at myself. I look the same as I did 10 minutes ago. Dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. Eyes that are usually bright but now look dark and hollow. I expected to see a monster, or a victim, or a shattered little girl. But I just look like Emery. I take a deep breath. Inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4, exhale for 4. It is the tactical breathing technique I learned during my first year of emergency training. It forces the parasympathetic nervous system to engage. It forces the panic back into its cage. The only child worth celebrating. The words replay in my head. But something is changing. Inside the ballroom, those words felt like a knife in the gut. Out here, in the quiet, they feel like something else. They feel like permission. For 32 years, I have tried to play by their rules. I tried to be impressive enough, quiet enough, grateful enough. I thought if I just achieved one more thing, if I just proved my worth one more time, they would look at me and see a daughter. But they do not want a daughter. They want an asset. And because I refused to be a liquid asset, I became a liability. I look at my reflection. My jaw sets. The trembling in my hands stops. They made a mistake tonight. They thought they were burying me. They thought that by ignoring me in front of the people they fear most, their peers, they would shame me into silence. They thought I would go home, cry into my pillow, and come back to Sunday brunch begging for scraps of affection. They chose the wrong stage, and they definitely chose the wrong actress. If they want to treat me like a stranger, I will show them what a stranger can do. If they want to pretend I'm invisible, I will become the kind of invisible that strikes from nowhere. I will not just be a footnote in the Watson legacy. I will be the editor who rewrites the whole damn book. The door behind me opens. The sound of applause spills out for a brief second before being cut off again. Mitchell steps into the hallway. He looks different than he did inside. The mask of polite indifference is gone. In its place is a sharp, predatory focus. He adjusts his cufflinks, walking toward me with a stride that eats up the distance between us. He does not ask if I am okay. He knows I am not okay, and he knows that asking is a waste of time. We are past comfort. We are in the operational phase now. He stops a foot away from me. He reaches out and tucks a loose strand of hair behind my ear. His touch is gentle, but his eyes are hard. "You handled that better than I would have," he says quietly. I was about 2 seconds away from flipping the table. "Table flipping is messy," I say. My voice sounds surprisingly steady. "We need to be precise." Mitchell nods. He reaches into his inside jacket pocket and pulls out his phone. The screen lights up his face in the dim hallway. He stares at it for a moment, reading a notification. A slow, cold smile spreads across his face. It is not a nice smile. It is the smile of a man who has been holding a winning hand for weeks and finally gets to lay his cards down. He turns the phone screen toward me. There is a single text message. It is from a number I do not have saved, but I know who it is. The timestamp is 1 minute ago. "They are here," Mitchell says. I look at the message, then back at the closed doors of the ballroom. Inside, my father is probably making another toast. He is probably feeling invincible. He thinks he controls the room. He thinks he controls the narrative. I smooth my dress one last time. "Good," I say. "Let's go ruin a party." To understand why walking out of that ballroom felt less like a tantrum and more like a prison break, you have to understand the ecosystem of the Watson family. For 32 years, I did not live in a home. I lived in a curated exhibit of upper-middle-class American success, presided over by 2 curators who believed that reputation was not just a currency, but a religion. My parents, Gordon and Diane Watson, are what the local papers call pillars of the community. In our town, that means they sit on 5 different charity boards, chair the annual hospital gala, and have a reserved pew at the Episcopal Church that they utilize strictly for networking purposes. Gordon is a consultant for high net worth individuals, a title that is vague enough to be impressive and specific enough to explain why he is always golfing with senators. Diane is a professional wife, a role she treats with the tactical severity of a 4-star general. Her battlefield is the country club dining room, and her weapon is the backhanded compliment. Growing up, there was no such thing as a private failure or a private joy in our house. Everything was public relations. If I got an A on a history test, it was only valuable if the teacher was influential. If I made the soccer team, it only mattered if the team captain's father could help Gordon with a zoning permit. We were not children. We were assets in the Watson portfolio. And like any portfolio, there was a diversification strategy. Brielle was the high-yield bond. She was the one they poured capital into. From the moment she could walk, she was groomed for a life of decorative ease. She took ballet not because she loved dance, but because it improved her posture for debutante balls. She went to a private liberal arts college that cost $60,000 a year, not to learn a trade, but to meet the sons of men who worked with Gordon. She was the investment they expected to pay dividends in social standing and grandchildren with hyphenated last names. I, on the other hand, was the volatile stock. I was too opinionated, too sharp, and entirely too interested in the messy, unpolished reality of the world. While Brielle was learning how to arrange flowers and host dinner parties, I was obsessed with how systems failed. I wanted to know what happened when the power grid went down, or when the levees broke. I chose a career in emergency management, working on the front lines for organizations that dealt with hurricanes, supply chain collapses, and community crises. To my parents, this was not a vocation, it was an embarrassment. I remember the day I told them I had been accepted into the master's program, the one I had just finished before tonight's disaster of a party. It was a Sunday afternoon. 2 years ago, we were sitting in the sunroom, surrounded by white wicker furniture that no one was actually allowed to sit on comfortably. I got in, I had said, placing the acceptance letter on the glass table. It is one of the top programs in the country for crisis response. Gordon did not pick up the letter. He peered at it over the rim of his reading glasses, holding his espresso cup with pinky extended precision. Crisis response, he repeated, tasting the words like they were spoiled milk. Is that administrative, or are you going to be driving an ambulance? It is logistical, Dad, I explained, trying to keep the defensive edge out of my voice. It involves planning for large-scale disasters, coordinating federal and local agencies. It is important work. Gordon sighed, the sound of a man burdened by mediocrity. Does it come with a title, something we can put in the Christmas newsletter? Or are we just going to say Emory is working for the county? It is not the county, it is a specialized field. It sounds like manual labor with a degree, Diane chimed in, not looking up from her iPad where she was scrolling through interior design concepts for the summer house. Will you be wearing a uniform? I really do not think a uniform sends the right message. Emory, it looks so service industry. It is service, I said, my voice rising. That is the point. Lower your voice, Diane snapped instantly, her head snapping up. You are disrupting the harmony. Why do you always have to make everything a confrontation? That was the Watson motto. Don't disrupt the harmony. Harmony, in our house, meant total submission to the narrative that we were perfect. Harmony meant never talking about the time Gordon lost $50,000 on a bad stock tip, or the time Diane had a meltdown because the florist sent the wrong shade of hydrangeas. Harmony meant pretending that Brielle wasn't drowning in anxiety and that I wasn't drowning in student debt. And that brings us to the money. The celebration tonight was ironic because my parents had not contributed a single cent to the degree they were pretending to honor. When I turned 18, Gordon made it clear the family funds were for strategic paths. My path was considered a hobby. So, I worked. I waited tables at a diner where the grease smell permeated my pores. I took out loans with interest rates that kept me awake at night. I worked overnight shifts at a dispatch center while studying for exams. Meanwhile, Brielle's allowance was more than my annual salary, They bought her a condo in the city so she would have a safe base while she figured out what she wanted to do. They paid for her trips to Europe to find herself. They paid for her wardrobe, her car, her therapist. I did not resent Brielle for taking it. She was soft because they made her soft. They had removed every obstacle from her path until she lost the ability to walk over uneven ground. But I resented the lie. I resented sitting at Thanksgiving dinners listening to Gordon brag about his girls as if he had built us both, when in reality, he had built one and tried to starve the other into submission. Then there was Mitchell. If I was the stain on the rug, Mitchell was the tear in the fabric. My husband is not a flashy man. He drives a 4-year-old sedan. He wears suits that he buys off the rack. He works in corporate compliance and forensic auditing, a job that sounds incredibly boring to most people, but terrifies people like my father. Gordon hates Mitchell because Mitchell is the only person in the room who isn't impressed by Gordon. When we first started dating, Gordon tried to give Mitchell the talk. He took him into the study, poured him a scotch that cost more than our rent, and tried to big dog him. He asked about Mitchell's 5-year plan, his portfolio, his lineage. Mitchell had just smiled that calm, unnerving smile of his. My plan is to make sure Emery is happy, Gordon, and my lineage is mostly farmers and teachers. We tend to be good at spotting manure. Gordon never forgave him for that. At family gatherings, my parents treated Mitchell like a hired driver who had been accidentally invited to the table. They spoke over him. They explained simple concepts to him, assuming he wouldn't understand the nuances of high finance or fine art. "Mitchell," Diane would say, "you really should try the wine. It is a Bordeaux. That means it is from France." "I know where Bordeaux is, Diane," Mitchell would reply, his voice level. "Thank you." But lately, something had shifted. For the past 6 months, Mitchell had been quieter than usual. He would come home from work late, his eyes tired but his mind clearly racing. He would ask me odd questions about my parents' foundation, the Watson Family Trust. He asked who sat on the board. He asked how often they filed their disclosures. "Why do you care?" I asked him one night about 3 weeks ago, while we were washing dishes. "You know, looking at their finances just makes you angry." Mitchell had dried a plate with slow, deliberate circles. "I am working on a project," he said, "a compliance review for an oversight firm. It involves a network of regional charities." And he looked at me then, and I saw a flash of that same cold, predatory focus I saw in the hallway tonight. "And I think the Watson Family Trust is swimming in the same pond I am draining, but I cannot talk about it yet. Not until I am sure." He never brought it up again. I assumed it was just a coincidence, or that he was just venting his general frustration with the type of tax bracket games my parents played. But sitting in that ballroom tonight, watching my father raise a glass to Brielle, watching my mother smile that shark-like smile, pieces started to click into place. The urgency in Mitchell's text message. They are here. The way he had been watching my father all night, not with anger, but with the clinical detachment of a butcher eyeing a side of beef. My parents thought they were the kings of this castle. They thought their money and their name were a shield that could deflect anything my feelings. The truth, reality itself. They thought they could invite 60 people to watch them erase their eldest daughter, and that everyone would just clap because that is what you do when the Watsons throw a party. I looked at the closed doors of the ballroom. I could hear the muffled sound of laughter inside. They were probably moving on to the second course. My father was probably telling that story about the time he shook hands with the governor, editing out the part where the governor forgot his name 2 minutes later. They had spent 30 years building a monument to themselves. They had spent 30 years making sure every brick was polished, every angle was flattering, and every crack was painted over. They believed that if you looked perfect, you were perfect. I turned to Mitchell. He was sliding his phone back into his pocket. "You never told me exactly what you found," I said. "I could not," Mitchell said. "Conflict of interest. Until tonight." "And what changed tonight?" "Tonight," Mitchell said, adjusting his tie. "They made it personal. And tonight, The federal auditors I have been coordinating with finally got the warrant. I stared at him. A warrant? Not for an arrest. Not yet, Mitchell clarified. For the records. The real records. But that is just the legal side. The people walking through the front door right now, they are the social side. They are the ones who are going to hurt Gordon more than a judge ever could. He offered me his arm. It was a gesture of old-fashioned chivalry that felt entirely new in this context. It wasn't an offer of support. It was an offer of partnership. Your grandmother is leading the charge, he added. I nearly choked on air. Ruth, you called Ruth? I did not have to call her, Mitchell said, a small smirk playing on his lips. She called me. She heard about the guest list. She had a few things she wanted to say about the Watson legacy. Ruth Gallagher, my mother's mother, the woman Diane pretended did not exist because she smoked cheap cigarettes, drank whiskey neat, and had spent 40 years as a union rep for factory workers. Ruth, who had zero money but enough grit to pave a highway. My parents had built a fortress of glass, and I had just realized that I was standing outside with a pocket full of stones. Do you want to leave? Mitchell asked. We can go. We can get in the car, drive home, order pizza, and let them rot. I looked at the door. I thought about the 32 years of being told I was too loud, too difficult, too messy. I thought about the student loans. I thought about the way my father looked at Brielle like she was a trophy, and at me like I was a typo. If I left now, I would always be the girl who ran away. I would be the unstable daughter who couldn't handle her sister's success. I would be exactly who they said I was. No, I said. I do not want to leave. I reached out and pushed the heavy mahogany door open again. The blast of noise and light hit me. But this time, I didn't flinch. I want to introduce them to my friends. The disintegration of my illusion began exactly 14 days before the event. It did not start with a shout or a fight. In the Watson household, devastation is almost always digital. I was sitting at my kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold, reviewing the final edits on my thesis regarding floodplain evacuation protocols. The laptop pinged. It was a notification from my mother. The subject line was not "Congratulations" or "So proud of you." It was simply logistics, June 15th. I clicked it open. There was no greeting. There was no preamble asking how I was holding up after defending my dissertation, or how I felt about finally being done with 2 years of sleepless nights. The body of the email was a bulleted list of instructions. Venue: the Oaks Country Club. Grand Ballroom. Time 6 in the evening for cocktails. 7 for dinner. Dress code black tie optional. Please ensure Mitchell has a proper fitting. We do not want a repeat of Easter. You do not need to worry about anything. The planner has handled the menu and the decor. Just show up on time. Attached to the email was a spreadsheet titled final_guest_list_v4.xlsx. I remember feeling a strange, hollow thud in my chest. It was the sensation of being managed, not celebrated, but I told myself to be grateful. They were paying for a party. They were acknowledging the degree. I moved the cursor to the attachment and double-clicked. The file opened, populating the screen with names arranged in neat rows. I scrolled down. Row 1 through 10. The board of directors for my father's consulting firm. Row 11 through 20. The heavy hitters from the local charity league. Women who my mother lunched with and competed against in a blood sport of passive-aggressive philanthropy. Row 21 through 40. Business partners. Golf buddies. The mayor. 2 state representatives. And the family that owned the car dealerships across the tri-state area. I kept scrolling. I was looking for a specific set of names. I was looking for Sarah, my study partner who had dragged me through statistics. I was looking for Dr. Eris Thorne, my thesis advisor, who had mentored me when I wanted to quit. I was looking for the 3 women I worked with at the dispatch center, the ones who had covered my shifts so I could attend lectures. I scrolled to the bottom of the list. 60 names. Not a single one of them knew me. I sat there for a long time, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the apartment. This list was not a celebration of a graduation, it was a networking mixer. It was a transaction. I was the excuse for the tax write-off. But I was not the purpose of the evening. I picked up my phone and dialed my mother. She answered on the second ring. Her voice breathless. I could hear the background noise of a boutique or a salon. "Emery, I am a little tied up right now," she said. "Did you get the email?" "We went with the sea bass. Everyone loves sea bass." "I got the email, Mom," I said, keeping my voice level. "I am looking at the guest list." "Isn't it wonderful?" she breezed on. "The senator said he might stop by for the cocktail hour. Gordon is thrilled. It is great exposure." "Mom, I don't see any of my friends on this list." There was a pause on the other line. It wasn't a pause of confusion. It was the pause of someone recalibrating their patience for a toddler. "Well, of course not," she said. "We had to keep the numbers tight. The Oaks has a capacity limit for the private room we wanted." "There are 60 people on this list," I pointed out. "I don't know 55 of them. I would like to invite Dr. Thorne and maybe 3 friends from the program. We can cut the Henderson couple. You haven't spoken to them in 5 years. We cannot cut the Hendersons. Emery, he is referring a major client to your father next quarter." Her tone sharpened, losing its airy quality. "And honestly, honey, are you sure your friends would be comfortable?" "Comfortable? Why wouldn't they be comfortable?" "It is a formal dinner," she said, her voice dropping to that conspiratorial whisper that implied she was doing me a favor. "You know how your academic friends are. They can be a bit rugged. I just don't think they would fit the atmosphere we are trying to curate. We want the evening to flow. We don't want anyone feeling out of place." The translation was immediate. "Your friends are not rich. Your friends do not matter. They will ruin the aesthetic." "It is my graduation party," I said, gripping the phone tighter. "Shouldn't the atmosphere be about me?" "Stop being difficult," she snapped. "We are throwing you a $30,000 party. The least you can do is not make it a headache. Do you know how much stress I am under trying to get the florals right? Just let us handle it. It is for your own good." She hung up before I could argue. I was left staring at the phone, feeling that familiar, suffocating gaslight settling over me. I was being ungrateful. I was being selfish. I was ruining the harmony. 3 days later. The physical invitation arrived in the mail. It was heavy. The envelope was lined in gold foil. I pulled the card out, expecting to see my name in the center. It wasn't. In the center of the card, in massive, embossed calligraphy, were the words, "Celebrating the Watson Legacy," underneath, in much smaller, standard font. It read, "Please join Gordon and Diane Watson for an evening of excellence, honoring the next chapter of our family's future," and then, at the very bottom, in the smallest font size on the card, "On the occasion of Emery Watson's degree completion." I stood by the mailbox, the wind fluttering the edges of the card. It was so blatant, it was almost funny. The next chapter, the future, they weren't talking about me. I was 32, my chapter had started years ago, and they had refused to read it. The future was Brielle. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a party for me. This was a launch party for Brielle. I didn't know what the specific announcement was yet. Maybe an engagement. Maybe a job at Dad's firm. Maybe she was just finally moving out of their house, but the entire event was designed to position her. I was just the hook. I was the pretext they needed to gather a room full of donors and investors, without it looking like a blatant cash grab. I drove to my parents' house that evening. I didn't call first. I found my father in his study. He was reviewing a portfolio, a glass of scotch untouched on his desk. The room smelled of leather and old money. He didn't look up when I walked in. "Dad," I said, "if this is about the table arrangements, talk to your mother," he muttered, turning a page. "It is not about the tables. It is about the invitation." I tossed the card onto his desk. It slid across the mahogany and hit his elbow. "Celebrating the Watson Legacy." "Really?" Gordon slowly took off his reading glasses. He looked at the card, then up at me. His expression was one of profound boredom. "It is a theme, Emery. It ties everything together. It erases me, I said. My name is basically a footnote. You didn't invite my advisor. You didn't invite my friends. You invited your clients. You are using my graduation to host a business meeting. He sighed. Leaning back in his chair, the leather creaked. You are 32 years old. Stop acting like a child who didn't get enough sprinkles on her birthday cake. We are introducing you to the most important people in the city. Do you have any idea what these connections could do for you if you actually tried to leverage them? I don't want to leverage them. I want to celebrate with the people who helped me get the degree. And those people cannot do anything for you, he said coldly. Look, Emery, we are doing a nice thing. We are spending a fortune. All you have to do is show up. Smile. And don't be the center of attention. Is that really so hard? Can you just blend in for once? Don't be the center of attention. At your own party? The irony was so thick I could taste it. But it was the dismissal in his eyes that hurt the most. He didn't see a daughter standing there. He saw a nuisance. He saw a logistical hurdle that needed to be managed so he could get to the real event. What is the announcement about Brielle? I asked. He blinked, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. What makes you think there is an announcement? Because the future is never me, I said. What are you announcing? It is a surprise, he said, turning back to his papers. Just be happy for your sister. She needs this boost right now. She has been feeling very unsure of her path. This night is going to give her a lot of confidence. Don't ruin it for her. I walked out of the house without saying goodbye. I felt numb. It was the confirmation I hadn't wanted but needed, my hard work, my 2 years of grinding, my thesis. It was all just a prop to boost Brielle's self-esteem. When I got home, Mitchell was sitting on the couch. The apartment was dark, save for the blue light of the television. He had the invitation in his hand. He had clearly fished it out of the trash where I had thrown it earlier. He didn't look angry. That was the thing about Mitchell that terrified my parents. He didn't get hot. He got cold. He was studying the card with the intensity of a forensic accountant looking for a discrepancy in a ledger. I saw the guest list you left on the counter, he said without looking up. Yeah, I said, dropping my keys on the table. It is a networking event. No one from your life is on it. Mom said they wouldn't fit the atmosphere. Mitchell finally looked at me. His eyes were dark, unreadable. He tapped the card against his knee. They are erasing you, he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. I went to see Dad. He told me not to be the center of attention. He admitted it is basically a confidence booster for Brielle. Mitchell let out a short, dry laugh. It was a sound devoid of humor. Of course it is. They are leveraging the Watson Legacy brand. They need to show the investors that the line is secure. You are too independent, so they are pivoting to the compliant asset. He stood up and walked over to me. He placed his hands on my shoulders. He felt solid, real, the only real thing in a world that was rapidly becoming a stage play. Emery, he said, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think about the answer very carefully. What? I have been holding on to some things, information, about the trust, about how they move money, about how they use these parties. He paused, searching my face. If we go to this party, and they do what I think they are going to do if they push you aside to elevate her, I expect them to, I said bitterly. No, Mitchell said. I mean, if they do it publicly, if they try to bury you in front of everyone, if that happens, and if someone were to stand up and tell the truth, the absolute, unvarnished, ugly truth about who they are and what they have done, could you handle it? I frowned. What do you mean? Who is going to stand up? I am asking if you are ready to burn the bridge. Mitchell said, not just cross it, burn it, because if we go into that room, I am not going to let them treat you like a prop. I have a file. Emery. I have been building it for months, but I won't use it unless you give the order. If you want peace, we stay home. But if you want justice. He let the sentence hang. I thought about the email. I thought about my mother's voice telling me my friends weren't good enough. I thought about my father refusing to look at me, treating my achievement as nothing more than a warm-up act for Brielle's existence. I looked at Mitchell. "I don't want to stay home." Mitchell nodded. He didn't smile, but the tension in his shoulders eased, as if a weapon had finally been unlocked and armed. "Okay," he said. "Then we go. But we don't go alone." The night before the party, the silence in our apartment was heavy enough to choke on. Mitchell had gone to bed early, or at least he had pretended to, leaving me sitting in the living room with the lights off, watching the headlights of passing cars slice across the ceiling. I felt like a soldier waiting for dawn before a battle I was guaranteed to lose. At 11:15 at night. My phone vibrated on the coffee table. I stared at it. It was a number I did not recognize, with an area code from D.C., 300 miles away. My first instinct was to ignore it. Telemarketers did not call this late, but debt collectors might, or perhaps it was my mother, calling from a different line to remind me to wear my hair up because my neck looked unfortunate when I left it down. I picked it up. "Hello. Is this Emery Watson?" The voice was male, crisp, and sounded like it was speaking from inside a wind tunnel. Speaking. "This is David Ross, senior recruiter for Meridian Crisis Solutions. I apologize for the late hour, Ms. Watson, but I have been trying to track down a direct line for you all day. Your university registrar is surprisingly protective of student data." I sat up straighter. Meridian Crisis Solutions was not just a company. In my field, they were the gold standard. They were the private sector rapid response team that the government called when FEMA was too slow and the National Guard was too busy. They handled everything from wildfire logistics to post-hurricane infrastructure rebuilding. "Meridian," I asked, my voice cracking slightly. "Is this about an application because I have not applied yet? I just graduated." "We know," Ross said. "We have been reading your thesis." My stomach did a slow roll. "You have... Doctor. Thorne sent it to us 3 weeks ago. Community-led resource distribution in high flood zones." I read the abstract, and then I sent it to our director of operations. She read the whole thing twice. "Ms. Watson, are you available to meet tomorrow morning? Say, 8 o'clock. "Tomorrow is Saturday," I stammered. "Disasters do not take weekends off, and neither do we," Ross said, a hint of dry humor in his tone. "We have a team in town assessing a potential partnership with the state. We are staying at the Hyatt downtown. Can you make it?" "Yes," I said, before my brain could even process the logistics. "Yes, I will be there." I hung up the phone and sat there in the dark, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. My family had spent my entire life telling me that success was about who you knew, about which country club your father belonged to, about the handshake and the smile. I had none of those things. I had a laptop, a stack of research on floodplains, and a mountain of student loans. And yet, Meridian had called me. I slept for maybe 2 hours. When I woke up, I put on my best suit, the charcoal one I had bought at an outlet store for my thesis defense, and drove downtown. The meeting was not in a boardroom. It was in a converted conference suite that had been turned into a temporary command center. There were maps taped to the walls, whiteboards covered in logistical flowcharts, and half-eaten bagels on a side table. It smelled of coffee and high-stakes stress. David Ross was a man in his 50s with the look of someone who had spent a lot of time yelling over the sound of helicopter blades. Sitting next to him was a woman who introduced herself as Director Elena Vance. She did not smile, but she shook my hand with a grip that could crush walnuts. "Let's cut to the chase, Emery," Vance said, opening a folder on the table. "We see a lot of academic papers. Most of them are theoretical fluff. They look good in a journal, but they fall apart the second the power grid fails." She tapped the paper in front of her. It was my thesis. "This," she said, "is actionable. You identified a bottleneck in supply chain delivery for rural counties that we have been trying to fix for 5 years. Your model for using local ham radio networks as a backup communication layer is brilliant in its simplicity." I felt a flush of heat rise up my neck. "Thank you. I spent a lot of time interviewing first responders in the Panhandle. It shows," Ross said. We are launching a new pilot program funded by a federal grant. It is called the Rapid Integration Initiative. We need someone who understands both the theory and the ground-level reality. We don't need an intern. We need a sector lead. I blinked. A sector lead. But I just finished my master's. I have 0 years of postgrad experience. You have 6 years of dispatch experience and you just wrote the manual on how we should be doing our job, Vance said, cutting me off. We don't care about your tenure. We care about your competence. The position involves training local teams, coordinating with state agencies, and deploying to disaster zones as a logistical commander. She slid a piece of paper across the table. This is the offer. I looked down. The numbers swam before my eyes. The base salary was $112,000 a year. I stopped breathing for a solid 5 seconds. It was more money than my father paid his junior associates. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. It was enough to pay off my loans in 3 years. It was enough to buy a house. It was enough to walk into a room and not feel like a beggar. There is a signing bonus, Ross added, misinterpreting my silence as hesitation. $15,000 and full benefits, obviously. I started, my voice failing me. I cleared my throat and tried to sound like the professional they thought I was. This is incredible. I accept. I would be honored. Vance finally smiled. It was a small, sharp expression. Good, because we need you to start Monday. But there is one condition. Anything, I said. This grant we are operating under, Ross explained, leaning back in his chair. It requires a certain level of public visibility. Part of the mandate is to show that we are recruiting top-tier talent from the communities we serve. We need to make a formal presentation of the appointment letter. Usually, we do a press release, but since you are a local hire, we were hoping to do something a bit more personal. Do you have any events coming up? A graduation ceremony? A family gathering? The room seemed to tilt. A family gathering. I thought about the email from my mother, celebrating the Watson legacy. I thought about the guest list full of people who didn't know my name. I thought about the table at the back of the room where I was supposed to sit and be quiet while my father announced Brielle as the future of the family. My parents wanted a show. They wanted to display the Watson excellence. They wanted to prove that their genes produced winners. Well, I was about to give them a winner, just not the one they bought. Actually, I said, a slow, dangerous calm settling over me. I do have an event. Tonight, my parents are hosting a graduation party for me at the Oaks Country Club. Ross's eyebrows went up. The Oaks, that is quite the venue. It is, I said. My father, Gordon Watson, is very big on public image. There will be about 60 people there, local business leaders, politicians. The mayor might even stop by. Vance's eyes lit up. The mayor. That would be excellent for the grant optics. Would it be appropriate for us to drop by? We could present the offer letter, maybe say a few words about why we chose you. It would only take 5 minutes. It would be perfect, I said. In fact, I think it is exactly what the evening needs. I walked out of that hotel feeling 10 feet tall, the imposter syndrome that had plagued me for years, the voice that sounded like my mother, telling me I wasn't polished enough, wasn't smart enough, wasn't enough, had been silenced by a single piece of paper with a 6-figure number on it. I sat in my car in the parking lot and picked up my phone. I didn't call Mitchell first. I called the one person who would understand the tactical lay of the land. I dialed Ruth Gallagher. My grandmother picked up on the first ring. She didn't say hello. She just said, I heard about the guest list. Ruth was 78 years old, lived in a small bungalow on the south side of town, and had spent 40 years working as a shift supervisor at a textile plant. She had calluses on her hands and a mind like a steel trap. She was the only person Diane was afraid of, mostly because Ruth refused to be polite when someone was being stupid. Hi, Grandma, I said. Your mother sent me the invitation. Ruth rasped. Her voice sounded like gravel in a blender. It looks like a wedding invitation for a corporation. The Watson legacy. What a load of horse manure. Are you going to go? I have to go, I said. But I have news. Big news. I told her everything. I told her about the call, the meeting with Meridian, the job offer, the money. I told her about the title. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. 112,000, Ruth asked. Yes. And you are going to be bossing people around in disaster zones. Basically. Good, she said decisively. That suits you. You were always good in a crisis, unlike your father, who falls apart if his steak is overcooked. I laughed. A sound of pure relief. They want to come to the party. Grandma, Meridian. They want to present the offer letter in front of everyone. They think it is good. PR. And what do you think it is? She asked. I paused, watching a pigeon peck at a crumb on the hood of my car. I think Dad is planning to make the whole night about Brielle. I think he's going to stand up and announce that she is the golden child. I think he's going to humiliate me. He is, Ruth said. It wasn't a guess. I spoke to your aunt yesterday. Gordon has been bragging that he is going to set the record straight about the family succession. He thinks you are a dead end, Emery. He thinks you are going to be a social worker making minimum wage for the rest of your life. So if I let Meridian come, I said, I am hijacking his party. It is not his party, Ruth said sharply. It is your party. The invitation says Emery's graduation in the fine print, doesn't it? That makes it yours legally and morally. She took a breath, and I could hear the click of her lighter. She had quit smoking 10 years ago, but she still flicked the lighter when she was thinking. Listen to me, kid, Ruth said. For 30 years, those two have treated you like a piece of furniture that doesn't match the drapes. They want to hide you, fine. But if they invite an audience, they don't get to control the show. I am scared, I admitted. If I do this, they will never forgive me. They have never loved you for who you are. Emery, Ruth said, her voice dropping to a harsh, painful whisper. They only love the reflection of themselves they see in you, and since you don't reflect them, they don't see anything. You have nothing to lose. I gripped the steering wheel. She was right. I had spent my whole life trying to buy a ticket to a show that was sold out. So what do? I asked. You let those Meridian people come, Ruth commanded. You tell them to show up late. Let Gordon make his little speech. Let him say his piece. Let him dig the hole nice and deep. And then, Ruth said, you let the professionals walk in. I will be there. I wasn't going to go. But I wouldn't miss this for the world. I will bring the popcorn. She paused one last time. Emery, remember this? If they chose the stage, you have the right to choose the lighting. And tonight, we are going to turn the floodlights on. I hung up the phone. My hands were shaking, but not from fear anymore. It was adrenaline. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. I didn't look like the girl who cried in the bathroom because her mother criticized her dress. I looked like a sector lead. I texted David Ross. The party starts at 7. The speeches usually happen at 8:15. If you arrive at 8:20, you will have everyone's attention. He replied instantly, confirmed. See you there. I put the car in gear. I had 6 hours until the party. I needed to pick up Mitchell. I needed to get dressed, and I needed to prepare my face to look completely, utterly surprised when the world came crashing down on my father's head, to understand why I walked into that ballroom with the intent to burn it down. You have to understand the final conversation I had with my parents. It happened 48 hours before the party, even after the job offer from Meridian, even after the validation from David Ross. There was a small, foolish part of me that wanted to give them one last chance to be parents. I drove to their house on a Thursday afternoon. The sky was overcast, a bruised purple color that threatened rain. The house a sprawling colonial revival with manicured hedges that looked like they were cut with a laser loomed at the end of the driveway. It was a house designed to impress strangers, not to shelter a family. I found my father in the sunroom. He was reviewing the final catering invoices for the party. My mother was arranging hydrangeas in a crystal vase, stepping back every few seconds to critique her own work. I need to talk to you about Saturday, I said. I did not sit down. Gordon did not look up. He flipped a page of the invoice, his gold pen hovering over a line item. If this is about the seating, Emery, we have been over this. Table 9 is perfectly respectable. It is not about the seating, I said. My voice was steady, but my hands were clenched at my sides. It is about the purpose of the night. I want the party to be about my graduation. I want you to actually acknowledge the work I did. Gordon finally stopped writing. He took a slow sip of his iced tea, the ice cubes clinking against the glass. He looked at me with an expression of mild exhaustion, as if I were a persistent telemarketer. Emery, he said, we are spending $30,000 on a dinner. We are inviting the most influential people in the county. Do you really think we are doing that just so you can show off a certificate in disaster management? Emergency management and community resilience, I corrected him. And yes, that is usually what a graduation party is for. He laughed. It was a dry, dismissive sound. Let's be realistic. Your degree is admirable, in a civic sort of way, but it is not a career that builds a legacy. It is service work. It is blue-collar work wrapped in a master's degree. We do not celebrate maintenance, Emery. We celebrate ownership. The words hit me like a physical slap. We do not celebrate maintenance. I save lives, I said quietly. My work saves lives. You manage chaos, he countered. Brielle is going to manage assets. There is a difference. Brielle is the face of this family's future. You chose a path that puts you in the background. Do not blame us for keeping you there. I looked at my mother. Mom, Diane sighed, snipping the stem of a white rose with a violent click of her shears. Oh, Emery, stop being so dramatic. Your father means well. You are just being sensitive. You have always been like this, trying to make everything a competition with your sister. It is not a competition, I said. I just want to be seen. You will be seen, she said soothingly, in a tone that meant the exact opposite. You will be seen supporting your sister. That is your role on Saturday. Don't spoil the harmony. I looked down at the table where Gordon had spread his papers. Next to the invoice was a printed document. It was titled, Keynote Speech Draft, The Future of Watson. I reached out and flipped the page over before Gordon could stop me. It was a script. I scanned the bullet points. Welcome guests. Highlight family tradition of excellence. Brief mention of Emery's completion of studies. Transition to main topic. Brielle's appointment to the board of the foundation. Video presentation. Brielle's vision. Toast to the only child who understands the legacy. The air left my lungs. You wrote a script? I whispered. You actually wrote a script to sideline me at my own party. Gordon snatched the paper back. It is about narrative flow. Emery, we need a strong closer. Brielle is the closer. I am the graduate, I said. You are the occasion, Gordon corrected coldly, his eyes hard. Brielle is the event. Now, if you are done throwing a tantrum, I have calls to make. Be at the venue at 6:30 and try to do something with your hair. You look tired. I turned and walked out. I did not slam the door. I closed it very, very gently. That was the moment the daughter died, and the strategist was born. Mitchell was waiting for me in the driveway, leaning against the side of our car. He was watching the house with a look of intense dislike. He saw my face, the pale, shock-still expression, and he straightened up. He did not ask what happened. He opened the passenger door for me. We drove in silence for 2 miles until we pulled into the empty parking lot of a community park. Mitchell killed the engine. They did it, didn't they? He asked. They wrote a script, I said, staring out the windshield. They are going to announce Brielle is taking over the foundation board. I am just the warm-up act. Mitchell let out a long breath. He reached into the back seat and grabbed his briefcase. He set it on his lap and clicked the latches open. Emery, he said, I need to tell you something. I have been waiting because I wanted to be sure. I wanted to have the paper trail locked down, and I wanted to give you the chance to handle them your way. But if they are going to play it like this, you need to know what you are really dealing with. What is it? He pulled out a thick file folder. It was labeled simply, Compliance Review, Watson Trust. My firm was hired 6 months ago to do a third-party audit of several regional nonprofits, Mitchell said. His voice shifted into his professional register, precise, factual, dangerous. It is a standard procedure for state accreditation. Your parents' foundation, the Watson Family Trust, was on the list. And it is a shell, Mitchell said. It is hollow. I frowned. What do you mean? They donate millions. The hospital wing, the gala. They move money, Mitchell corrected. They don't donate it. I found a pattern of transfers going back 5 years. They solicit donations from their business partners, those people on the guest list for Saturday, and they funnel it into the trust. Then, the trust pays consulting fees to a shell company in Delaware. And guess who owns the shell company? Brielle, I guessed. Gordon and Diane, Mitchell said. But here's the kicker. They have started listing Brielle as a junior consultant on the payroll. They are using the charity funds to pay for her lifestyle. That condo she lives in, the trust pays the rent. Her trips to Europe, listed as international research for the foundation. My mouth fell open. That is illegal. It is commingling of funds, Mitchell said. It is tax fraud, and it is embezzlement. If the IRS looks at this, they go to prison. If the donors find out, they are socially destroyed. He handed me a sheet of paper. It was a spreadsheet highlighting a series of transactions. June 3rd, catering deposit, the Oaks Club, $12,000, Source Watson Family Trust, outreach event. They are paying for your graduation party with charity money, Mitchell said. They are writing it off as a donor outreach event. That is why the guest list is full of their clients. That is why it is the Watson legacy. It has to be a business event to justify the expense. I stared at the paper. The numbers blurred. The $30,000 party that my mother had guilt-tripped me about it wasn't even their money. It was stolen money. Does anyone else know? I asked. Not yet, Mitchell said. My report is drafted, but I haven't filed it with the State Oversight Committee. I can file it Monday morning. Once I do, it triggers a mandatory investigation. It becomes public record. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. I didn't want to blow up your family. Emery, I know how much you wanted them to be decent people, but they are using you as a human shield for their tax evasion. They need this party to look legitimate so they can justify the expense report. I looked at the house in the distance, then down at the file in my lap. For years, I thought my parents were just cold. I thought they were snobs who loved reputation more than their children, but it was worse than that. They were frauds. The legacy they were so obsessed with was a Ponzi scheme of social capital and stolen donations. They were not powerful, they were vulnerable, and they had just handed me the match. Do not file it yet, I said. Mitchell looked surprised. Emery, this is a crime. I know, I said. And we are going to report it. We are going to do everything by the book, but I don't want to just file a report that gets lost in a bureaucracy for 6 months. I want them to know that I know. I closed the file. They want a show on Saturday, I said. They want to talk about the future of the foundation. They want to talk about Brielle's vision. I turned to Mitchell. I think we should help them with that presentation. I think we should bring some clarity to the topic. You want to do it at the party? Mitchell asked. That is aggressive. No, I said. I am not going to make a scene. I am going to let them make the scene. I am going to let Gordon give his speech. I am going to let him dig his grave. And then, when he asks for the future, we are going to introduce him to the reality. I handed the file back to him. Bring the file to the party, I said, and make sure you have a copy of that video you told me about, the one of the toast, because when the walls come down, I want to make sure we have the footage. Mitchell smiled. It was the first real smile I had seen on his face in weeks. Done, he said. Now, I said, putting the car in gear. Let's go buy a dress that doesn't look like service industry. Friday morning broke with a sky the color of slate, heavy and unyielding. It was the kind of weather that usually made me want to curl up with a book. But today, it felt like atmospheric cover for a tactical operation. I was not going to work. I was not going to the library. I was going to war. And the command center was a small, smoke-stained kitchen on the south side of town. I sat at Ruth's laminate table, watching her pour coffee that looked thick enough to pave a driveway. My grandmother did not believe in decaf, and she definitely did not believe in panic. She was wearing a floral housecoat that had seen 3 presidential administrations, but her eyes were as sharp as cut glass. "Lay it out," Ruth said, setting a mug in front of me. Time, place, assets. It felt less like planning a party entrance and more like planning a heist. "The cocktail hour starts at 6 in the evening," I said. "Dinner is at 7. The speeches usually happen after the main course is cleared, so around 8 or 8:15. That is when Gordon likes to hold court. He waits until everyone has had 2 glasses of wine so they are pliable." Ruth nodded, tapping a pen against a yellow legal pad. "So we have a 2-hour window where you are the target, 2 hours where they try to make you feel small before they drop the hammer. Basically, we do not engage during the appetizers," Ruth decided, scribbling a note. "Let them ignore you. Let them freeze you out. The colder they are, the hotter the fire looks when we light it. You arrive on time. You bring Mitchell. You sit where they tell you. You smile like you took a sedative." She looked up at me. "Who is the cavalry?" "Meridian Crisis Solutions," I said. "I spoke to David Ross and Director Vance again this morning. They are confirmed. They are bringing the regional hiring director and a representative from the State Emergency Board." "Good," Ruth said. "Suits, official suits. Gordon is terrified of people who have actual authority. He only knows how to deal with people he can buy or people he can charm. He cannot do either with a federal contractor." I pulled out my phone. David asked about the timing. I told him 8:20. I want them to walk in right as Gordon finishes his toast. "Make it 8:25, Ruth corrected. Let the applause die down. Let the silence settle. Let everyone look at Brielle and think, well, that is the future. And then bam, the door opens. I sent the text to David Ross update. Entry at 8:25. Please ensure you have the physical credentials. David replied within 10 seconds. Copy that. We are bringing the offer letter and the state commendation for excellence. We are also bringing the plaque. It is heavy. I looked at Ruth. A plaque. Visual aids are important, Ruth said dryly. People believe what they can see. If you just say you got a job, Gordon will spin it. He will say it is an internship. He will say he made a call to get you in. But a plaque with a state seal, he cannot spin that. Ruth took a drag from her imaginary cigarette, a habit she kept even though she held a pen. Now, about the witnesses. I made a few calls. Grandma, I don't want a mob, I said quickly. This has to be professional. I am not trying to trash the venue. Relax, kid. I didn't call the biker gang. I called the people who actually run this city. She pointed the pen at me. You know Chief Miller Fire Department. I interviewed him for my thesis. He is coming. He hates your father's zoning proposals. And I called Sarah Jenkins from the Nurses Union and Tom Vargo from the Logistics Depot. They are not coming to shout. They are coming to have a drink at the bar, which, by the way, has a public license for the front room. They will be standing right by the doors when your Meridian friends walk in. Why? I asked. Because your parents' friends, the bankers, the lawyers, they live in a bubble, Ruth said. They think they are the only people who matter. When they see a fire chief and a union head nodding at you with respect, it breaks the bubble. It validates you in a language they understand power. I felt a shiver go down my spine. Ruth wasn't just planning a disruption. She was planning a complete dismantling of my parents' social reality. Okay, I said. What about Mitchell? The husband, Ruth said, softening slightly. He is the wild card. He knows where the bodies are buried. He has the files, I said. The financial records? The proof that they are using the foundation's money to pay for this party? We keep that in the pocket, Ruth advised. That is the nuclear option. We don't lead with the tax fraud. We lead with your success. We only use the fraud if Gordon tries to destroy you after the Meridian reveal. If he tries to say you are lying, or that you are unstable, then Mitchell drops the bomb. But not before. It was a sound strategy. It gave us the moral high ground. We weren't there to ruin them. We were there to celebrate me. If they ruined themselves in the process, that was their choice. I left Ruth's house at noon. The air was still heavy, but the plan was solid. My next stop was the copy center. It felt ridiculous, almost juvenile, to be 32 years old and printing out my own report card, but I needed the physical weight of evidence. I printed everything. My final transcript with the 4.0 grade average, the letter of recommendation from Dr. Thorne, which described my research as groundbreaking, the acceptance email from the state fellowship I had turned down to take the Meridian job. I bought a sleek, black leather portfolio to hold it all. I wasn't going to wave these papers around. I was going to have them sitting on the table next to my plate, silent, available, irrefutable. At 2 p.m, I met Mitchell at a coffee shop near his office. He looked calm, but his eyes were constantly scanning the room, a habit from his auditing days. He had a small, hard drive case on the table. I checked the venue specs, Mitchell said, sliding a coffee toward me. The Oaks has a dedicated AV system for the speeches. They usually record the toasts for the family archive. I called the vendor pretending to be your father's assistant. I asked to make sure the audio feed was crisp. And they are recording, Mitchell said. But just to be safe, I am going to have my phone recording audio from the table, and I have set up a cloud sync. The second the file cuts, it uploads. If your father says something slanderous, we will have it preserved in 3 different locations before the dessert is served. You really think he will go that far? I asked. Slander. Mitchell looked at me, his expression dead serious. Emery, they are cornered animals. They have spent 30 years building a myth. You are threatening the myth. People kill for less than that. Gordon won't just ignore you tonight. He is going to try to discredit you. He needs the room to believe you are the failure so that Brielle looks like the savior. He is going to lie. I guarantee it. I looked down at the coffee cup. I just wanted them to be proud of me. For once. I know, Mitchell said gently, and that is what makes this so tragic. But since we cannot get pride, we will settle for respect, or fear. I am fine with fear. He tapped the hard drive case. I have the financial report in here, the compliance review. I also made a digital copy and scheduled it to be emailed to the State Attorney General's tip line for Monday morning, just in case I lose my nerve. You won't lose your nerve, I said. No, he agreed. I won't, not after I saw how you looked when you read that invitation. We finalized the signals. If I touched my ear, Mitchell would intervene. If I stood up, he stood up. We were a unit, a 2-person army against a 60-person cocktail party. I went home to get ready. The dress I had bought was a deep emerald green. It was structured, elegant, and looked nothing like the soft, pastel things my mother always tried to force me into. It looked like armor. I was applying my mascara carefully, so my hands wouldn't shake when my phone buzzed on the vanity. I glanced at the screen. Brielle. I froze. Brielle never texted me. We communicated through our mother, or through awkward, forced conversations at holiday dinners. I picked up the phone. The message was short. Are you actually coming tonight? Mom says you might not show up. I stared at the words. I could hear her voice, thin, anxious, always looking for permission. Brielle wasn't the villain of this story. Not really. She was the product. She was the golden goose who had been force-fed expectation until she couldn't breathe. I typed back, I will be there. 3 dots appeared, then vanished, then appeared again. Okay, just be careful. Dad is in a mood. He is really focused on this legacy thing. I think he's putting a lot of pressure on tonight. It was a warning, a weak, passive warning, but a warning nonetheless. Brielle knew. She knew the script. She knew I was walking into a trap, and this was her way of telling me to duck without actually having to stop the shooter. "I can handle Dad." I replied, "I know you can." She wrote back, "You always could. I don't want to fight. I just want it to be over." I put the phone down. "I just want it to be over." That was Brielle in a nutshell. She didn't want the crown, but she was too afraid to take it off. She wanted the peace of submission. Well, she wasn't going to get peace tonight. She was going to get the truth. I finished my makeup. I pulled my hair back into a sleek, low bun. I put on the pearl earrings Ruth had given me for my 21st birthday, real pearls, not the costume jewelry my mother favored. I walked out into the living room. Mitchell was waiting. He was wearing his dark navy suit, the one he wore for court depositions. He looked sharp, dangerous, and completely on my side. "Ready?" he asked. I took a deep breath. I thought about the legacy. I thought about the empty seat at the table where my life should have been. I thought about the $112,000 a year and the work that actually mattered. "Let's go," I said. "We have a party to crash." We drove to the Oaks Country Club in silence. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns. The parking lot was full of luxury sedans and SUVs. I saw my father's car parked right in front, in the reserved spot. As we walked up the stone steps to the entrance, I could hear the murmur of the crowd inside. It was the sound of my childhood, polite, exclusionary, terrifying. But this time, the sound didn't make my stomach turn. It made my blood heat up. I checked my watch. 6:15. We were 15 minutes late. Perfect. I checked the inside pocket of my clutch. My phone was there. My notes were there. I looked at Mitchell. He gave me a nod. I pushed open the heavy double doors and stepped into the cool, conditioned air of the lobby. The maitre d' looked up, smiling automatically, until he recognized me. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a glitch in the matrix before resetting. "Miss Watson," he said, "your parents are already in the ballroom." "I know," I said, my voice ringing clear in the high-ceilinged space. "We are just in time." I didn't wait for him to escort us. I knew the way. I walked down the corridor, the sound of my heels clicking against the marble like the ticking of a clock. Behind those doors, my family was waiting to erase me. Behind those doors, 60 people were waiting to watch me disappear. But they had forgotten one thing. You cannot erase something that has already written itself in permanent ink. I reached the ballroom doors. I could hear my father's voice booming inside, laughing at someone's joke. I put my hand on the brass handle. If they wanted a show, I would give them a show. But the ending was mine. The grand ballroom of the Oaks Country Club was a masterclass in aggressive elegance. As the heavy double doors swung shut behind us, the first thing that hit me was the smell of a potent cocktail of expensive lilies, roasted garlic, and old money. The lighting was amber and low, designed to flatter aging complexions and make rhinestone jewelry look like diamonds. It was a beautiful room. The kind of room where people got married or announced mergers. But to me, it felt like the inside of a velvet-lined coffin. I stepped onto the plush carpet, Mitchell at my side. My hand tightened on his arm, not out of fear, but out of a need to ground myself. The room was already full. 60 people, give or take, were milling around the high-top tables, nursing flutes of champagne and picking at hors d'oeuvres that were too small to taste but expensive enough to matter. The hum of conversation was a steady, polite drone, a specific frequency of laughter and chatter that you only hear in places where the membership fees cost more than a Honda Civic. I scanned the crowd. I recognized faces from the local business section of the newspaper. There was the bank president, laughing too hard at a joke made by a real estate developer. There was the head of the zoning commission, swirling his scotch and looking bored. There were the women from my mother's charity circle, their eyes darting around the room to assess who was wearing what and who had gained 5 pounds since the Easter gala. And there, holding court near the center of the room, was my father. Gordon Watson looked like he had been born in a tuxedo. He was standing with Councilman Miller, a man whose re-election campaign my father had donated to heavily. Gordon was gesturing with his free hand, his face animated, charming, and utterly in control. He looked like the patriarch of a dynasty. I walked toward him. I did not rush. I walked with the steady, measured pace of someone who had every right to be there. Gordon saw me approaching. His eyes flicked to me, then to Mitchell, and then immediately back to the councilman. There was no smile. There was no, "Excuse me, my daughter is here." There was just a curt, almost imperceptible nod, the kind of acknowledgement you give to a waiter who has just refilled your water glass. It was a dismissal. He was telling me, without saying a word, "Not now. I am working." I stopped 5 feet away. I let the silence hang for a second, forcing him to feel my presence. Before I turned away, I would not beg for a hello, not tonight. "Friendly," Mitchell murmured, his voice low and dry. "He is securing the perimeter," I said. "He is making sure the VIPs are happy before the show starts." We moved deeper into the room. To my left, near the head table, I saw my mother and Brielle. The sight of them made my stomach twist. My mother, Diane, was fussing over Brielle like a stage mother prepping a child star. She was adjusting the strap of Brielle's silver dress, smoothing a non-existent wrinkle on her shoulder, and whispering instructions into her ear. Brielle looked stunning, in a terrifying, frozen sort of way. Her hair was swept up in an intricate chignon that must have taken hours. Her makeup was flawless, but her eyes were darting around the room with the frantic energy of a trapped animal. She held a glass of sparkling water with both hands, her knuckles white. Above them, stretching across the cream-colored wall behind the podium, was the banner. I had expected it, but seeing it in real life was different. It was massive, silk-screened in gold and navy. The Watson legacy honoring the future. There was no "Congratulations, Emery." There was no "Class of 2026." My name was nowhere. I had been completely scrubbed from the narrative of my own graduation party. The banner was a corporate logo, and Brielle was the product launch. I walked over to the welcome table where the seating cards were arranged in neat, alphabetical rows. The calligraphy was beautiful. I found my name, Ms. Emery Watson. I flipped the card over. Table 12. I looked at the floor plan diagram on the easel next to the table. Table 1, 2, and 3 were clustered around the podium, the VIP zone. That was where my parents, the politicians, and the big donors would sit. Table 12 was in the back corner, next to the swinging doors that led to the kitchen. It was the table they usually reserved for the photographer or the event planner's assistant. It was the Siberia of the ballroom. "Table 12, I said, showing the card to Mitchell. "Naturally." "Close to the exit," Mitchell noted, scanning the room. "And far from the microphones. They really thought of everything." "They don't want me in the background of the photos," I said. "If I sit in the back, they can crop me out." We made our way to table 12. It was exactly as bad as I thought. The draft from the kitchen door hit my ankles every time a server walked through. The centerpiece was smaller than the ones on the main tables, a modest arrangement of white roses instead of the towering orchids at the front. We sat down. The vantage point was actually perfect for what we needed. From here, we could see the entire room. We could see the dynamics playing out like a game of chess. "Look at them," Mitchell said, nodding toward a group of men near the bar. "That is the board of the hospital foundation. And over there, talking to your mom, that is the wife of the managing partner at Sterling Cooper. This isn't a party. Emery, it is a shareholder meeting. It is a fundraising event," I corrected him. "Remember the file they wrote this off as donor outreach." "It shows," Mitchell said. "Nobody is talking about you. I have been listening. They are talking about interest rates, summer homes in the Hamptons, and the new wing at the museum. You are the excuse, not the subject." I poured myself a glass of water. "Let them talk. It makes it easier." Just then, the double doors at the entrance swung open again. The noise in the room didn't stop, but it shifted. It was a subtle change, a ripple of confusion that started near the door and spread inward. Ruth Gallagher had arrived. My grandmother was not wearing black tie. She was wearing a sharp navy blue Sunday suit that she had probably owned for 20 years, and she was carrying a leather handbag that looked like it could double as a weapon. She walked into the room not with the hesitant shuffle of an elderly relative, but with the stride of a union boss entering a negotiation. She stopped at the edge of the carpet and surveyed the room. Her expression was one of profound, unbothered judgment. My father saw her immediately. I saw his posture stiffen. He said something quick to the councilman, forced a smile, and then beelined toward Ruth. He moved fast, trying to intercept her before she could get too deep into the room. "Ruth," Gordon said, his voice loud enough to be heard but tight with annoyance. "I didn't think you were coming. Diane said you weren't feeling well." "Diane lies," Ruth said. Her voice was like gravel rough, distinct, and carrying effortlessly over the low hum of jazz music. "And I am feeling fine. Gordon, I am here for my granddaughter." A few heads turned. The way she said granddaughter made it sound like an accusation. Gordon stepped in front of her, trying to block her view of the room. It was a physical block, a wall of tuxedo and cologne. "Well, we are glad you made it. Why don't I have a server show you to your seat?" "We have a spot for you at—" He faltered. I knew for a fact he hadn't assigned her a seat. "I can find my own seat," Ruth said, stepping around him. "Where is the graduate? Where is Emery?" Gordon smiled, a tight rictus of muscle that didn't reach his eyes. "Emery is settling in. She is over there." He pointed vaguely toward the back of the room, toward the kitchen doors, toward table 12. Ruth followed his finger. Her eyes landed on me. I raised a hand and gave her a small wave. Ruth looked at me, sitting in the shadows next to the service entrance. Then she looked back at Gordon. Then she looked at the VIP tables draped in gold cloth at the front. She didn't get angry. She didn't shout. Instead, a slow, terrifying smile spread across her face. It was the smile of a woman who had just been handed the final piece of evidence she needed to win a case. "The back table," Ruth said loudly. "You put the guest of honor at the back table, next to the kitchen." The conversation at the nearest table, the one with the bank president, stopped. "It is about logistics, Ruth," Gordon hissed, his smile straining. "Better flow for the servers. Emery prefers the quiet." "I am sure she does," Ruth said. "Just like you prefer the spotlight." She didn't wait for his response. She walked past him, cutting a path through the crowd. People parted for her. She was not rich. She was not famous. But she had an energy that repelled nonsense. She walked all the way to table 12 and pulled out the chair next to mine. "Nice view," Ruth said as she sat down. She placed her handbag on the table with a heavy thud. "Best in the house," I said. "You can see all the strings from here." "He is sweating," Ruth observed, nodding toward my father. "He knows I am off script. He hates variables." "Just wait," Mitchell whispered. "The variables are just getting started." A waiter appeared with a bottle of wine. "Red or white, ma'am?" "Whiskey," Ruth said. "Neat, and bring the bottle." The waiter blinked, then looked at me. I nodded. "Do as she says." The room began to settle. The cocktail hour was winding down. The staff started moving with more urgency, ushering guests toward their tables. The lights dimmed slightly, shifting from amber to a more focused spotlight on the podium. I watched my parents work the room. They were a team. I had to give them that. Diane would initiate the conversation, laugh at the right moment, and then Gordon would step in to close the deal. They were moving people like game pieces, positioning the most important donors at the tables closest to Brielle. Brielle had been seated at table 1, right in the center. She sat with her back straight, smiling when spoken to, nodding when required. She looked lonely. "She looks like she is waiting for a firing squad," Mitchell noted. "She thinks she is," I said. "She knows she isn't qualified to run the foundation. She knows this is all smoke and mirrors, but she doesn't know how to say no to him." "She will learn tonight," Ruth said, pouring her whiskey. "Sometimes you have to watch the house burn down to realize you can walk out the door." A sharp, metallic ringing sound cut through the air. Ding, ding, ding. My father was standing at the podium, tapping a spoon against his champagne flute. The sound was crisp, commanding. The room fell silent. 60 faces turned toward the front. The waiters stopped moving. The kitchen doors behind us swung shut one last time, cutting off the noise of clattering dishes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gordon began, his voice booming through the high-quality sound system. "If everyone could please find their seats, we have a very special evening ahead of us." He smiled that perfect, practiced smile. He looked at the room with the confidence of a man who believes he owns the truth. "Tonight is about legacy," he said. "It is about the values we pass down. It is about the future we build." He didn't look at me. Not once. I felt a cold calm settle over me. My heart wasn't racing anymore. My hands weren't shaking. I felt the way I felt when I was managing a crisis simulation, detached, focused, ready to execute. I looked at Mitchell. He had his phone flat on the table, the screen dark, but the recording app running. He looked back at me. He didn't smile. He just gave me a single, sharp nod. "It begins." "Showtime," I whispered. I picked up my glass of water and took a sip. I was sitting at table 12, in the dark, next to the kitchen, but I knew something they didn't. The back of the room is the best place to watch an ambush. The silence in the room was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a held breath. My father stood at the podium, bathed in the warm glow of the spotlight, looking out at the 60 faces he had gathered to witness his glory. He held his champagne flute with a practiced ease, the crystal catching the light. "The Watson name," Gordon began, his voice rich with false humility, "has never been about individual achievement. It has been about stewardship. It has been about carrying the torch of excellence from one generation to the next." He paused, letting the words sink in. The room nodded collectively. It was a reflex. When Diane and I started the foundation 30 years ago, we knew that our greatest contribution would not be the buildings we funded or the programs we launched. It would be our bloodline. It would be the children who would carry our values forward. I sat perfectly still at table 12. My hands were folded in my lap. I could feel Mitchell's leg pressed against mine under the table, a solid wall of support. I did not look at the floor. I looked straight at my father. "Tonight," Gordon continued, pivoting slightly to his left, toward table 1. "We are here to mark a transition. A graduation is not just an end. It is a beginning. It is the moment when potential becomes reality." He smiled. It was the smile of a man about to unveil a statue of himself. "And looking at my family tonight, I have never been more certain of the future. I see a young woman who embodies everything this community stands for: grace, poise, the ability to navigate the complex world of philanthropy with an innate understanding of our legacy." He raised his glass higher. "I am thrilled to announce that, effective immediately, the board of the Watson Family Trust has voted to appoint a new director of vision and strategy." The room rippled with polite murmurs. This was the news they had been promised. "Please join me," Gordon said, his voice swelling, "in welcoming the new face of our future, the one who will carry this family into the next decade." He looked directly at Brielle. Brielle Watson. The applause was immediate. It was polite, enthusiastic, and completely manufactured. Brielle stood up slowly. She looked terrified. She looked like she was about to face a firing squad, not a promotion. She gave a small, shaky wave to the room. I did not clap. Mitchell did not clap. Ruth poured herself another shot of whiskey. Gordon waited for the applause to die down. He wasn't done. He needed to drive the nail in. He needed to make sure the hierarchy was clear. "You know," he said, chuckling softly into the microphone, "raising children is an investment. You pour everything you have into them. You hope for a return." He looked at Brielle with a gaze that was terrifyingly possessive. "And tonight, standing here, looking at you, Brielle, I realize that our investment has paid off. You are the realization of our dreams." Then he said it. The line he had been saving. The line that was meant to erase 32 years of my life. "To Brielle," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that echoed through the speakers. The only child worth celebrating. The room froze. It wasn't a subtle slight. It was a demolition. Even the bank president, who had been nodding along, stopped with his glass halfway to his mouth. The brutality of the sentence hung in the air like a noxious gas. The only child worth celebrating. My mother, sitting next to Brielle, nodded. She raised her glass, her face arranged in a mask of agreement. She was confirming it. It wasn't a slip of the tongue, it was the family position. I felt the blood drain from my face, but I did not move. I did not cry. I did not storm out. That is what they wanted. They wanted the unstable daughter to make a scene so they could look at each other with sad eyes and say, "See, this is why we chose Brielle." I sat there and I stared at him, but I wasn't the only one staring. The chair next to me scraped loudly against the floor. Ruth Gallagher stood up. She didn't stand up quickly. She stood up with the slow, creaking inevitability of an old oak tree that was about to fall on a house. She didn't have a microphone, but she didn't need one. She had the voice of a woman who had shouted down factory foremen in the 1980s. "Gordon," Ruth said. Her voice cut through the silence like a whip. Gordon blinked, blinded by the spotlight. He shaded his eyes, looking toward the back of the room. "Ruth, we are in the middle of a toast." "No," Ruth said, stepping away from the table. She walked into the center aisle. "You are in the middle of a lie." The gasp from the room was audible. My mother half rose from her seat, her face pale. "Mother, sit down. You have had too much to drink. I am sober as a judge." "Diane," Ruth shot back, not even looking at her. She kept her eyes locked on Gordon. "You invited 60 people here tonight under the pretense of a graduation party. The invitation said, Emery Watson. Remember her? The other one. The one sitting by the kitchen door." Gordon laughed nervously. "Ruth, this is a family joke. Emery knows we are proud of her. Don't make this awkward." "I am not making it awkward," Ruth said, advancing 2 steps. "I am making it accurate. You just looked a room full of people in the eye and said your youngest daughter is the only one worth celebrating at your eldest daughter's graduation party." She pointed a gnarled finger at the banner behind him. "Look at the wall. Gordon, does it say Happy Graduation? No, it says Watson Legacy. Look at the program. Is there a speech for Emery? No. I saw the run of show on the waiter's stand. It is all Brielle." The guests started to shift in their seats. The veneer of polite society was cracking. These people were sharks, yes. But even sharks have a code. You don't invite people to an execution and call it a dinner party. It is tasteless. "This is a private family matter," Gordon snapped, his charm evaporating. "Security, could you please assist Mrs. May Gallagher?" "I don't need assistance," Ruth said. "And neither does Emery, because unlike you, she actually earned her way into this room." "Enough!" Gordon shouted. The microphone screeched with feedback. "Sit down, or get out." The tension in the room was so tight, it felt like a physical weight. Mitchell checked his phone. The recording was running. I looked at my watch. 8:25. Boom. The double doors at the back of the ballroom didn't just open, they were thrown open. The sound was heavy. Authoritative, the sound of business arriving. Every head in the room turned. Gordon looked up, annoyed, expecting a waiter or a late guest. It wasn't a guest. David Ross walked in first. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my car. And he walked with the clipped, efficient stride of a man who managed federal budgets. Flanking him was Director Elena Vance, looking like a terrifying deity of logistics in a structured blazer. Behind them were 2 uniformed officers, one from the fire department, Chief Miller, and one from the State Emergency Board. They didn't look at the bar. They didn't look at the banner. They didn't look at the VIPs. They looked like a SWAT team that traded guns for clipboards. Gordon faltered. "Excuse me, this is a private event." David Ross didn't even break stride. He didn't look at Gordon. He looked at a piece of paper in his hand, then scanned the room. "We are looking for Miss Emery Watson," Ross announced. His voice was calm, professional, and carried to every corner of the room. I stood up. "I am here," I said. The group turned in unison. They ignored the podium. They ignored the legacy. They walked straight past the bank president, past the real estate developers, past my stunned mother, and marched directly to table 12 next to the kitchen. The entire room pivoted. The center of gravity shifted from the stage to the shadows. Director Vance stopped in front of me. She didn't smile. She treated me with the grave, respectful seriousness of a commanding officer addressing a lieutenant. "Miss Watson," Vance said, loud enough for the microphone at the front to pick up the ambient sound. "I apologize for the intrusion, but we could not wait until Monday." "What is this?" Gordon demanded from the stage. He looked small now, standing under his giant banner. "Who are you people?" Vance turned slowly. She looked at my father with an expression of mild confusion, as if wondering why the hired entertainment was speaking. "I am Director Elena Vance of Meridian Crisis Solutions," she said. "We are the federal contractors for the new Tri-State Disaster Response Initiative." She turned back to me, dismissing him completely. "Emery," she said, dropping the formality just enough to show warmth. "The board reviewed your final conditions this afternoon. The state governor's office has expedited the approval." She signaled to David Ross. He stepped forward and opened a leather portfolio. He pulled out a document with a gold seal and a heavy wooden plaque. "We are here to formally present you with the letter of appointment," Ross said. He handed me the document. I took it. My hands were steady. "Appointment?" A woman at the next table whispered loudly. "To what?" Vance heard her. She turned to the room, addressing the crowd as if she were giving a press briefing. "Miss Watson has been selected as the new sector lead for regional emergency logistics," Vance announced. She was the #1 candidate in a nationwide search. Her research on floodplain evacuation is being adopted as the new state standard. She turned back to me and handed me the plaque. It was heavy. It felt like reality. "Welcome to the team, Emery," Vance said. "We have never offered a starting package this aggressive, but frankly, we have never seen an applicant with your tactical scores." "Thank you, Director," I said. My voice was clear. "I am ready to work." "Good," Vance said, "because the signing bonus has already been wired. $112,000 base, plus the federal stipend." A gasp rippled through the room. It wasn't polite this time. It was genuine shock. $112,000, in a room full of people who judged worth by zeros. I had just become very, very interesting. Gordon stood on the stage, his mouth slightly open. He looked like he had been slapped. He had just spent 10 minutes calling me worthless. And now a federal director was standing in his ballroom telling his wealthy friends that I was a high-value asset. My mother was staring at me as if I had grown a second head. Brielle had her hand over her mouth, but her eyes were wide with something that looked suspiciously like awe. I looked at the plaque in my hands. Then I looked at Mitchell. He gave me a wink. Then I looked at my father. "I am sorry, Gordon," I said, my voice carrying effortlessly across the silent room. "You were saying something about who is worth celebrating." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a narrative shattering. Ruth picked up her glass of whiskey. She raised it toward me. "To Emery," Ruth said, her voice raspy and triumphant, from the table near the door. "Chief Miller, the fire chief." My father had been trying to court for zoning permits, raised his beer. "To Emery," the chief said. And then, a strange thing happened. The bank president, sensing the shift in the wind, cleared his throat. He looked at the federal director, then at me. "To Emery," the bank president mumbled, raising his glass. One by one, the room turned. The sharks smelled blood. But this time, it wasn't mine. They realized the power in the room wasn't on the stage anymore. It was at the back table. "To Emery," the room echoed. I stood there, holding my plaque, surrounded by the best team money couldn't buy. My father stood alone on the stage, holding a microphone that no one was listening to. The energy in the ballroom had shifted from a curated celebration to something far more volatile. It was the feeling of a magic trick going wrong. revealing the wires and the mirrors to a crowd that had paid for a miracle. David Ross and Director Vance did not simply hand me the plaque and leave. They stayed, and by staying, they turned Table 12 into the new epicenter of the room. Ross opened his portfolio again, this time pulling out a glossy brochure about the Tri-State Initiative. He wasn't doing it to show off. He was doing it to answer the questions of the people who had suddenly swarmed us. "So this involves federal oversight?" the bank president asked. Peering at the document over Ross's shoulder, he was no longer looking at my father. He was looking at the seal of the Department of Homeland Security on the brochure. "It is a joint task force," Ross explained, his voice smooth and professional. "Emory will be managing a budget of $4.2 million in the first quarter alone. Her team coordinates directly with the governor's office during state emergencies." "$4 million," the banker repeated. He looked at me. Really looked at me. For the first time in 10 years, it wasn't warmth in his eyes. It was calculation. "That is substantial responsibility for a recent graduate." "She is not just a graduate," Vance interjected, sipping her sparkling water. "She is a specialist. We don't hand out sector lead titles to rookies. Emory's thesis on supply chain resilience is being fast-tracked for implementation in 3 counties. I stood there, holding a glass of champagne that a waiter had hurriedly placed in my hand, and watched the tide turn. It was fascinating and sickening all at once. The same people who had ignored me 20 minutes ago, the same people who had nodded along when my father called me worthless, were now lining up to shake my hand. "Emory, darling, Mrs. Sterling," the wife of the law partner, squeezed my arm. "I had no idea you were doing such important work. Gordon never mentioned it. You must be so proud." "I am," I said, keeping my smile polite but my eyes cold. "It has been a busy few years." "Disaster management," a real estate developer mused, nodding approvingly. "That is a growth industry. Smart move, very smart." I looked toward the stage. My father had come down from the podium. He was standing near the buffet line, holding a plate he wasn't eating from. He looked deflated. The spotlight was off, and without it. He just looked like an aging man in a tuxedo who had lost control of the narrative. My mother was still sitting at table 1. She wasn't moving. She was staring at the centerpiece, her face rigid. The social mask she had worn for 30 years had slipped, revealing the panic underneath. She knew what was happening. She knew that in the court of public opinion, they had just been exposed as liars. I saw Councilman Miller walk up to my father. Miller was a practical man. He didn't care about family drama, but he cared about optics. "Gordon," Miller said, his voice loud enough for me to hear over the din. "You told me your daughter was finding herself. You didn't tell me she was running the state logistics board." Well, it is a new development," my father stammered, adjusting his cufflinks. "We wanted to let her announce it in her own time." "She just did," Miller said dryly. "And she brought the feds with her. You might want to update your talking points. Gordon, it looks like you have 2 successful daughters, or maybe you just didn't notice the first one." Miller patted my father on the shoulder, a gesture that was patronizing rather than friendly, and walked away. He walked straight toward me. "Miss Watson," Miller said, extending a hand, "we should schedule a lunch. The fire department has some concerns about the new flood maps. I would love to hear your take." "I would be happy to." "Councilman," I said, "call my office on Monday." My office. The words tasted like wine. The party dissolved quickly after that. There was no dancing. There were no more speeches. The air was too thick with awkwardness. The guests finished their drinks and made their exits, murmuring apologies about babysitters and early flights. But as they left, the dynamic was undeniable. They shook my father's hand quickly, with averted eyes. They shook my hand with lingering enthusiasm, pressing business cards into my palm. By 9:30, the room was mostly empty. The staff was already clearing the tables. The Watson Legacy banner looked ridiculous now, a grandiose title for a hollow event. Ruth was sitting at table 12, finishing the bottle of whiskey she had commandeered. She looked pleased. "Not bad," she said. watching the last of the guests filter out. I have seen union strikes with less tension than this. We should go, Mitchell said, touching my elbow. We made the point. Let's not linger. I nodded. I gathered my plaque and my portfolio. I turned to say goodbye to Director Vance, who was chatting with the fire chief near the door. Emery. The voice was soft, trembling. I turned around. Brielle was standing there. My sister looked like a wreck. Her perfect chignon was starting to loosen, strands of hair falling around her face. She was holding her clutch so tightly her knuckles were white. She wasn't looking at me with jealousy. She was looking at me with fear. Brielle, I said, congratulations on the directorship. She flinched. Stop, please. She took a step closer, lowering her voice. I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know he was going to say that. The only child thing I thought he was just going to say I was joining the board. I didn't know he was going to erase you. I looked at her. I believed her. Brielle didn't have the malice for a calculated strike like that. She was collateral damage, just like me. It is okay, Brielle, I said, though it wasn't. He said what he thought. He just didn't expect anyone to fact-check him. It is not okay, she whispered. She looked over her shoulder at our parents, who were arguing in hushed, furious tones near the coat check. They are crazy, Emery. Tonight was weird, even for them. They wanted a show, I said. They got one? No, Brielle said, shaking her head frantically. It is not just the show. It is the pressure. Dad has been obsessing over this legacy thing for months. He keeps talking about securing the future, about locking things down. She hesitated, chewing on her lip. What is it? I asked. Brielle reached into her clutch. She didn't pull out a phone or a lipstick. She pulled out a folded piece of paper. It looked like a photocopy of a legal document. I found this, she said. In Dad's study, I was looking for a pen yesterday, and this was on his desk, under the speech draft. She handed it to me. I don't understand half of it, Brielle said, but your name is on it, and so is mine. But Emery, the dates are wrong. I unfolded the paper. Mitchell stepped closer, looking over my shoulder. It was a document from the Watson Family Trust. It was a disbursement schedule for a consulting fee. Payee B, Watson Associates. Amount $65,000. Date February 14th, 2024. I don't have a company called B. Watson Associates, Brielle whispered. I have never consulted for anything. I was in rehab in February of 24. Remember? I remembered. We had told everyone she was at a wellness retreat in Arizona. I looked further down the page. There was another entry. Payee E, Watson Logistics. Amount $48,000. Date August 10th, 2025. My blood ran cold. E. Watson Logistics, I read aloud. I have never registered a business in my life. I know, Brielle said, but the trust thinks you did, or at least, the tax records think you did. I looked at Mitchell. His face had gone hard, that forensic mask slipping back into place. He took the paper from my hand and studied it under the light of the sconce. This isn't just embezzlement, Mitchell said quietly. This is identity theft. They are creating shell companies in your names to siphon money out of the foundation. They are paying fees to you, claiming it as a legitimate expense, and then pocketing the cash. He looked at Brielle. Did you ever sign anything, a power of attorney, a tax document you didn't read? Brielle nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. All the time. Dad brings me papers. He says it is for the trust fund. He says, sign here, honey. It is just for the lawyers. I never read them. I trusted him. And me? I asked. I never signed anything. You didn't have to, Mitchell said grimly. They have your social security number. They have your history. If they forged your signature, Emery, they are using you as a tax shelter. They are washing money through your name. The pieces fell into place with a sickening thud. The party, the legacy, the obsession with image. They weren't just trying to look rich. They were trying to cover a massive financial hole. They needed the foundation to look active. They needed consultants to justify the outflows of cash. My father had stood on that stage and called me worthless. All while he was using my name to steal $48,000. He had humiliated me in public while privately using my identity to keep his yacht afloat. "Oh my God," I whispered. "That is why he hates my job. That is why he hates Mitchell." "Because Mitchell is an auditor," Brielle realized, her eyes widening. "If Mitchell ever looked at the books—" "I wouldn't just see the fraud," Mitchell finished. "I would see the victims, and the victims are his own daughters." I looked across the room at my parents. Gordon was gesturing angrily at the catering manager, probably fighting over the bill. Diane was standing alone, staring into a mirror, fixing lipstick that didn't need fixing. They looked small. They looked pathetic. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel a shred of desire to please them. I felt the cold, hard clarity of a prosecutor. "Brielle," I said, "do you have more of these?" "I took a picture of the whole file," she said, tapping her phone. "It is on my cloud." "Send it to me," I said. "Right now." "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice shaking. "I am going to do what I do best," I said. "I am going to manage the disaster." I turned to Mitchell. "The compliance report you have," I said. "The one you were going to file on Monday?" "Yes." "Does it mention these specific transactions?" "No," Mitchell said. "I saw the outflows, but I couldn't see the recipients. I suspected it was a shell, but I didn't know the shell was you." "Update the file," I said. Mitchell looked at me. "Emery, if I include this, if I include proof that they forged your signatures and used your identities, this goes from a civil fine to criminal charges. We are talking about federal wire fraud. We are talking about prison time." I looked at the banner one last time, the Watson legacy. "They stole our names," I said. "They stole your trust." I looked at Brielle. "And they tried to steal my dignity. They didn't care if I went to jail for tax evasion on a company I didn't know existed. They were willing to let me take the fall if the IRS ever came knocking." I took Mitchell's hand. "File it," I said. "File everything." Brielle let out a sob, but she didn't stop me. She nodded. She wiped her eyes, smearing her mascara, and for the first time, she looked like a sister. "I am coming with you," Brielle said. "I cannot go back to that house with them tonight. If I look at him, I will scream." "You can stay with us," I said. "We have a pull-out couch. It is not what you are used to, but it is honest." "Honest sounds good," Brielle said. We walked out of the ballroom together. Me, Mitchell, Brielle, and Ruth, who was waiting by the door with her empty glass. "Where are the parents?" Ruth asked, looking at our grim faces. "They are in the past," I said. As we walked through the lobby, I saw my father running toward us. He had finally noticed his audience was leaving. "Emery Brielle," he shouted. "Where are you going? We have to settle the bill, and we need to take a family photo for the newsletter." I stopped. I turned around. My father skidded to a halt. He looked at the four of us. He looked at the plaque in my hand. He looked at Brielle, who was standing firmly behind me. "The photo is canceled." "Dad," I said. "What are you talking about? You cannot just leave. We have guests to thank." "We already thanked them," I said. "And now, we are going home." "You are being ridiculous," he spat, his face turning red. "After everything I have done for you, after this party." "The party you paid for with money from Watson Logistics?" I asked quietly. Gordon froze. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like he had died standing up. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Yeah," I said. "We know." I stepped closer to him. "You have until Monday morning. Dad, that is when the report gets filed. I suggest you call a lawyer, a real one, not one of your golf buddies." I turned my back on him. "Let's go," I said to my family. And we walked out into the cool night air, leaving Gordon Watson standing in the lobby of the country club, alone with his legacy. The weekend after the party at the Oaks Country Club was not filled with apologies. In the Watson family, silence was the preferred method of conflict resolution, but when silence failed, they resorted to negotiation. My parents did not call me on Sunday to ask if I was okay. They did not call to explain why they had humiliated me or why they had stolen my identity to launder money. They called to manage the asset. I was sitting at my kitchen table with Mitchell and Brielle. Brielle had slept on our pull-out couch, still wearing my oversized t-shirt, looking younger and freer than I had seen her in years. Mitchell was finalizing the PDF of the compliance report. The phone rang. It was my father. I put it on speaker. Emery, Gordon's voice was calm, reasonable, the voice he used when closing a difficult client. We need to talk about damage control. The rumor mill is churning. People are asking questions about the logistics company. We need to issue a joint statement. A statement, I asked, staring at the steam rising from my coffee cup. Yes, something simple. We can say that the toast was a misunderstanding, a joke that didn't land, and regarding the financial mix-up with your name on the ledger, we will frame it as an administrative error, a placeholder entry that wasn't cleared. If you sign a waiver today, I can have the accountants fix it retroactively. I looked at Brielle. She shook her head violently. Dad, I said, you claimed $48,000 in expenses paid to a company that doesn't exist. You forged my signature. That is not an administrative error. That is fraud. Don't use that word. My mother's voice cut in, sharp and frantic. She was evidently listening on the extension. You are being dramatic. Emery, you are being selfish. We did everything for you. We gave you a life of privilege, and now you want to ruin us over a clerical mistake. Privilege. I laughed, a dry, hollow sound. You wouldn't even pay for my tuition. You wouldn't even invite my friends to my own party. You used my graduation as a tax write-off. You do not understand how the world operates, Gordon snapped, his patience fraying. Everyone does this. It is how wealth is managed. If you sink this ship, you drown too. Do you think that fancy new job of yours wants a scandal if you file that report? I will make sure Meridian knows exactly how difficult you are. I know people on their advisory board. I can make one call and have that offer rescinded before you even start. It was the threat I had been waiting for. Make the call, Gordon, I said. See what happens. I hung up. Monday morning arrived with the inevitability of a tidal wave. Mitchell filed the report at 9 a.m. He didn't do it with a press conference. He didn't leak it to the tabloids. He simply uploaded the file to the State Attorney General's secure portal and sent a certified copy to the chairman of the Watson Family Trust. It was a procedural act, quiet and lethal. By 10 a.m, my father made his move. I was sitting in my new office at Meridian, organizing my orientation materials, when my desk phone rang. It was Director Vance. Emery, could you come to my office? I walked down the hall, my heart beating a steady rhythm against my ribs. Had he done it? Had he actually managed to poison the well? I entered Vance's office. She was sitting behind her desk, looking amused. David Ross was standing by the window. Your father just called, Vance said. He managed to get through to one of our board members, who then called me. I apologize, I said. He threatened to do that. He told the board member that you were unstable, Ross said, reading from a note. He said you had a history of exaggeration and that hiring you would be a liability for the grant. He strongly suggested we rescind the offer to protect our mutual interests. I felt a flash of anger, hot and sharp. I can explain. Vance held up a hand. You don't need to explain. We did not hire you because of your father, Emery. We hired you because your simulation scores were in the top 1% of the country. We hired you because you know how to move water supplies across a flooded county in 6 hours. She leaned forward. I told the board member that if Mr. Watson contacted us again, I would file a harassment suit, and I told your father that we prefer to judge our employees by their work, not their lineage. She smiled. He hung up very quickly. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. My father's greatest weapon, his network, was useless here. He was trying to use currency from the old world to buy influence in the new one, and the exchange rate was zero. The final confrontation did not happen in a courtroom. It happened on Thursday evening, at the emergency meeting of the Watson Family Trust, because Mitchell had flagged specific transactions involving board members' donations being funneled into the shell companies. The independent directors, the ones who weren't in my parents' pocket, called a mandatory review. They demanded that Gordon and Diane answer the audit findings in person. Mitchell was asked to present the evidence, as a courtesy, and perhaps as a witness. I was invited to attend. Brielle came with me. The meeting was held in a glass-walled conference room downtown. My parents were already there when we arrived. They sat at the head of the table, looking diminished. My father's suit seemed a little too large for him. My mother refused to make eye contact with anyone. Around the table sat the other donors, the bank president from the party, the real estate developer, the hospital administrator. These were the people my parents had spent 30 years impressing. These were the people they feared most. Mitchell stood at the end of the table. He did not look at my parents. He looked at the screen where he projected the spreadsheet. "As you can see in Exhibit C," Mitchell said, his voice devoid of emotion, "there is a recurring pattern of disbursements to entities labeled consulting. These entities, specifically B, Watson Associates, and E, Watson Logistics, have no business licenses, no tax IDs, and provided no services." He clicked to the next slide. It was a copy of the check used to pay for the party at the Oaks. On June 15th, $32,000 was used to pay for a private event at the Oaks Country Club. This was categorized as donor outreach. However, the internal memo refers to it as legacy launch. This expense was not approved by the board. The bank president leaned forward. "Gordon, did you use the charity fund to pay for your daughter's party?" Gordon cleared his throat. He looked sweaty. "It was a networking event. Look at the guest list. You were all there. It was valid." "And the consulting fees?" the hospital administrator asked, pointing at the screen. "Who signed for these? Who is E? Watson." Gordon pointed a shaking finger at me. "She did." He lied. "Emery needed money. She was struggling after grad school. We tried to help her by giving her some consulting work. She signed the invoices. If the paperwork is sloppy, that is on her." The room turned to look at me. I stood up. I didn't need to shout. I had the one thing my father didn't have. I had the truth. "I have never received a dime from this foundation," I said clearly. "And I certainly never signed those invoices." I pulled a file from my bag. "I have submitted handwriting samples to the forensic accountant. The signatures on those checks are not mine. They match the handwriting on my father's personal correspondence." I placed the file on the table. "Furthermore, the money didn't go to me. We traced the bank routing numbers. The funds for E, Watson Logistics, were deposited into a joint account held by Gordon and Diane Watson in the Cayman Islands." The silence in the room was absolute. It was the sound of a reputation dying. My mother made a small, choking noise. "Gordon told me it was legal," she whispered, throwing him under the bus without hesitation. "He said it was standard structuring." "You are a liar," Gordon shouted, standing up. "You are a traitor to this family. After everything we gave you, you are trying to destroy us." "I am not destroying you," I said. "I am just turning on the lights. If the room is dirty, that is not the fault of the light switch." Then, Brielle stood up. My father looked at her, his eyes wild with hope. "Brielle, honey, tell them we were just trying to secure your future." Brielle looked at him. She looked at the man who had called her the only child worth celebrating, the man who had put her on a pedestal so he could hide behind her skirts. "You didn't secure my future, Dad," Brielle said, her voice shaking but resolute. "You stole it. You used my name to steal money. You made me an accomplice to a crime I didn't understand." She reached into her purse and pulled out her resignation letter. "I am resigning from the board," she said, "and I am cooperating fully with the audit." Gordon slumped back into his chair. He looked at the faces around the table, the friends, the peers, the audience he had performed for his entire life. They were not applauding. They were looking at him with disgust. The bank president closed his folder. "I move that we suspend Gordon and Diane Watson pending a federal investigation." "Seconded," the hospital administrator said. "All in favor." Every hand in the room went up. My parents were escorted out of the building by security. They didn't leave in handcuffs, not yet, but they left with something worse. They left with nothing. No title, no power, no legacy. I walked out of the building with Mitchell and Brielle. The night air was cool and clean. "It is over," Mitchell said. "No," I said, taking his hand. "It is just starting." In the weeks that followed, the fallout was swift. The IRS launched an investigation. My parents were forced to sell the house to pay back the misappropriated funds. The Watson legacy became a cautionary tale in the local papers. But the final twist didn't come from the courts. It came from the video. Mitchell had kept the recording of the toast the moment my father called Brielle the only child worth celebrating. He hadn't released it to the public. He had just shared it with the board as evidence of the hostile environment. But these things have a way of spreading. The video circulated quietly through the upper echelons of the city's elite. It became a symbol of the arrogance that everyone secretly hated. I could have used it to shame them further. I could have posted it online and let the internet tear them apart, but I realized I didn't need to. They were already ghosts. Instead, I took the signing bonus from Meridian, the $15,000 I hadn't expected, and I started a small fund. I called it the Ruth Gallagher Scholarship for Frontline Resilience. It wasn't a massive foundation. It was a simple grant for students who wanted to work in emergency management but couldn't afford the tuition. It was for the mechanics, the logistics officers, the people who worked in the background to keep the world running. 6 months later, I was standing in a command center, directing a fleet of trucks to a hurricane zone. My phone buzzed. It was an email from the scholarship committee. We had our first recipient, a young woman who worked nights as a dispatcher and wanted to get her degree. I smiled. I thought about the banner at the Oaks, the Watson legacy. My father thought a legacy was a name on a building. He thought it was a banner on a wall. He was wrong. A legacy isn't what you say about yourself. It is what you do when the lights go out. I put my phone away and turned back to the map. "Sector Lead Watson," the radio crackled. "We are ready for your command." "Copy that," I said. "Let's move." Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Please drop a comment below with your city or country. And let's share our thoughts on family boundaries and justice. If you enjoyed this story and want to support the channel, please subscribe to Juliet Revenge Stories. Like this video, and hit that hype button so we can get this story heard by even more people.